Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Tuesday. We have made it to Tuesday. I'm Jackson Lightcap, joined with my colleague Matthew Pennington. We're the host of Sports Now, and we had such a fun time yesterday. We're back for day 2 of this 5-day-a-week show.
Yeah, we thought yesterday we did, at least we feel like we did an all right job. We had a great time. So
other than some of the difficulties we had at the very beginning.
we had some struggles at the very beginning, but yeah, we're good. We're back, and like I said, I've said it a few times now. I'm ready to get this multi-day-a-week show thing going. And it's first show went pretty good, besides the little hiccups that we had at the start, but we got through it.
And as the show progresses, this show will grow. We plan on having a lot of guests on the show here in the future, a lot of guests. Instead of us just talking for 2 hours, we plan on having guests for about the whole entire 2 hours. All the folks out there who want to call in, we are working on trying to get a phone line into the show as well. So we're looking to have call-in guests here in the future. We're looking to have special guest stars here in the future. We're looking to just try to build this show and keep picking up momentum as well. Cannot wait for it. The show is going to grow. Just day 2 of it, and we have a lot of big stuff planned already in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, until we figure out the whole getting guests on, you guys are going to have to deal with just the 2 of us on this show, so hopefully...
We have some lined up. It's just a matter of we want to make sure everything's going smooth before we add another step to the process, but
yeah,
cannot wait. So, Matt, let's kick this show off. We were talking... Today's Tuesday, therefore it is our college day. We're going to talk a lot about college sports coming up in this show, especially the Big Ten. The Big Ten Conference starts shifting around in the next couple of years. The future schedules for some of the big schools such as Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, they've all been released. We're going to go in and talk about all of that coming up on this show. The Ohio State Buckeyes, the local team here in Ohio, a big win on Saturday. They started off slow against Maryland, but they were able to pull it out 37-17. We'll get into all of that as well. And although I know today is our college talk show, there were a lot of professional sports last night. We have to touch base on that. And the first question I want to ask in the first segment we have planned for this show, and for anyone out there, just another reminder, we are live in chat. So for anyone out there who has an opinion on this, please drop your answers below. But is the broadcaster's jinx real? Is the announcer's jinx real?
I know you already brought up a clip of, I believe it was last year.
We'll play the clip in a second.
It was me talking, and I absolutely hated that it ended up happening, but with the amount of games that we've announced, Jackson, yes and no. The reason no is because it's crazy to think that an announcer of the game has an impact on what's going on down on the football field, but also it just happens so much. You wonder, is there actually something going on? Is there something crazy going on? Because I already know what clip you even talked about trying to get it downloaded so we could show it on the show. But I absolutely hate that it was me that was doing it, because we haven't been able to get a clip of the amount of times you have done it yourself.
I've done it quite a few times, and I think that it's 100% real. The announcer's jinx, the broadcaster's jinx, whatever you want to call it, it is 100% real. Here's a couple of examples. We'll start with a clip of Matt jinxing Jackson Corville a year ago for the Centerville Elks.
The Elks, 6:02 left to go in the second quarter, but this is almost just a chip shot for Corville.
Snap is good. The hold is good. The kick is up, and it is no good. No good. Wide right.
Simple as that. The announcer's jinx is real. Jackson Corville, he went on to have a tremendous season for the Centerville Elks last season. He was a senior, received a lot of honors at the end of the season, was one of the best kickers that went through Centerville in quite some time. And for some of the kickers that have gone through Centerville, Mike Nugent comes to mind. They have been explosive with kickers, and Jackson Corville, we mentioned it, he's been the best one there for quite some time. He right now is playing at Ball State University, and he's tearing it up there as well. So congratulations, Jackson Corville. Great athlete, great kicker, excellent kid as well. So it sucks that Matt had to jinx somebody who's tremendous, but either way, Matt, maybe you helped him along. Maybe you helped motivate him, because I know that video was circling around on Twitter a little bit afterwards via I don't know who, but
All I know is
the answer was me, but
all I know is immediately
he's doing great
after-
for himself. I think you had some part in his success because he is doing wonderful things now at Ball State University. But the announcer's jinx, that's an example. It is real.
Immediately after, I felt terrible. Because I was confident in what he's been able to do. I mean, you take a look, he's playing college football at a MAC school. And then I bring up, he's good from this range. There's no way he should miss this, and he missed the field goal. It was one of those, the second it left my mouth, I was like, he's got this, right? Misses it. Oh, no. That's kind of what was going through my head as soon as that play was going on. Because I think I even remember when we cut to a break, I was telling you, Jackson, I'm like, dude, I feel so horrible because I lined that up for it to be like it should have been guaranteed automatic free kick, and then it ended up being a miss.
Yeah, and if I recall and remember correctly, I think you said some words that we will not repeat on air. But, and the reason why we are starting this show with this topic is the announcer's jinx real. Well, because recall yesterday's show, we made 2 takes in that show, and both of them failed drastically so far. And that's not even, we talked a lot of NFL for the upcoming weeks. Like, nobody can beat the 49ers. We said Baltimore is the most overhyped team right now in the AFC. We still have yet to see anything like that. They haven't played a game yet. But when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, we were talking about them, a 1-4 start, but we are super high on the Minnesota Vikings turning things around. We were super high on them being able to turn things around and start competing once again in that NFC North division and find a way to make the playoffs, whether they won the division, even though the Lions are running away with it, or if they ended up obtaining a wild card spot. Well, shortly after we made that take, Justin Jefferson was put on injured reserve, and he will be out for at least 4 weeks with a hamstring injury. And then we were talking about what the Philadelphia Phillies have been able to do over the last couple of years has been insane. And we were projecting them to possibly go up 2-0 on the road in Atlanta. Well, they were up 4-0. It looked like our take was correct. And then the broadcaster's jinx came into play. They lost 5-4. Five unanswered runs for the Atlanta Braves. Series is tied 1-1.
And yeah, going back to the whole Justin Jefferson being out for at least 4 weeks, that is going to make any chance of Minnesota clawing their way back. I don't think at this point, especially with Justin Jefferson being out for at minimum 4 weeks, I think the chances of the Minnesota Vikings potentially being NFC North champions is not out of the picture, but it's far from optimal right now for the Minnesota Vikings. And you talk about the Detroit Lions running away with it. The win for Las Vegas last night really just helped the Lions out that much more because the closest team to them is Green Bay, who's 2-3. And then you've got 1-4 for the Vikings and the Bears. So that was one thing that we talked about, both of us. The Lions are going to be a really good team this year. I expected Minnesota to be up there with them, and I expected it to be a 2-horse race between Minnesota and Detroit for the NFC North this year, but one of those teams has lived up to what I was expecting at the start of the season. One of the teams has not lived up to what I was expecting from the start of the season. And just the fact that Justin Jefferson is now going to be out for at least a month, that's going to make it that much more difficult for the Vikings. I still think it's possible they make it into the postseason off of a wild card, but winning the NFC North, that's such a long, long stretch down the road now for the Vikings.
And, in reality, they're only 3 games back. They are only 3 games back, but we've only played 5. They're already 3 games back. So that's certainly something you have to keep an eye out on. And still a long season ahead. Justin Jefferson, he's only going to miss a small portion of the season. But, reeling it back in, we made those 2 hot takes yesterday. I'm not even going to say hot takes. I'm just going to say takes in general because I don't think that they were out of the ordinary hot takes, But what we said on the show, the complete opposite has started to happen in real life. So, Matt, I remember yesterday we were talking about the AFC North. The Baltimore Ravens, I called them the most overhyped team in the AFC. You agreed. And then we started talking about who can run away with the AFC North. We both said the Cincinnati Bengals. I think we just jinxed it to now where Baltimore is not going to lose a game the rest of the season. I think that they are now going to go win the Super Bowl, and the Bengals will not win a game the rest of the season. They will finish last place. If the broadcasters and announcers jinx starts, if it happens like we've seen it so many times in the past, and it's not just with us. It happens to us, it seems like every time we call a game. It's kind of weird having that amount of power and impact on a game in our hands just by talking into a microphone with it. But even when you talk about the NFL or the MLB, how many times have NFL or college football announcers brought up, well, this kid has been perfect from inside 30 yards, and then they miss it?
Yeah.
It's always a graphic, and you cannot convince me otherwise that the announcer's jinx is not real.
Yeah, it makes me think of, I believe it was either Matt Prater or Justin Tucker.
I think it was, I know exactly what you're talking about. I think it was Justin Tucker.
It was one of those two, which automatic legs in the NFL. To be fair, it makes sense that this graphic comes up, but it was like 29 for 29 from inside 40 in the fourth quarter or something like that, and it was the very first miss. I knew it was either Tucker or Prater who
it was Justin Tucker. I remember because I was watching that game, and another game that comes to mind with the announcer's jinx also happened to Justin Tucker, where they said he never missed an PAT in his career. And then it was game on the line. I think it was 16-16 against the Saints a couple of years ago, and he boots it. As soon as they said that, he was perfect through his entire career. And it wasn't like he was a rookie or anything like that. He was in the league for quite some time at this point in time. He was perfect in PAT attempts. 16-16, chance to win the game, or at least put his team up with minimal time left to go. What did he do? He pushed it, and he missed it. And I remember watching that game, and I was just like, oh my goodness. There's a meme floating around of the face that he made after that. And man, I'm sure that you've probably seen it as well. But
I feel like I might have. Yeah.
His reaction was certainly called for.
And yeah, that's going back to the whole MLB, the Phillies. At this point, with how many different takes we've had in the MLB so far this season, I get a feeling that if you're a fan of any of the teams left right now in the MLB, if we start talking highly of your team, then tell us to quiet down, because something not so good is probably going to happen to your team.
We are live in chat.
Talking about it. If we start talking about your team, then you might just want us to quiet down and say, hey, don't talk about the Braves. Don't talk about the Braves, please. But no, we also did bring up yesterday, talking about the announcer's jinx, this didn't end up playing a factor. We talked about how good the Diamondbacks have looked so far this postseason. Now up 2-0 on the Dodgers. Now I say this, they're going to end up losing their next
4 straight.
Yeah, they're going to lose their next 2 home games against it. Is it 2 home, 2 away? Is it that deal in the MLB right now? I feel like it is.
Yes.
Now they're going to lose their next 2 home. They're going to lose their 2 home games against the Dodgers, and it's going to be 2-2 once the 4th game of the series is done.
No, I believe it's 2-3 if I'm not mistaken. No, 2-2. It is the NLDS. Sorry about that. So, championship and the NLCS, ALCS, that's when it goes 2-3-2.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure if it was 2-2 and then
this is a best of 5 series.
Yeah. So it should be 2-2-1 then. If
2-2-1, yes.
If a fifth game is
2-2-1
needed,
and then anything else after that is 2-3-2.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just absolutely it's real. You can't convince me otherwise. I know there's people out there that claim that it's not, but it's real. And Matt, I mentioned this. The amount of power that I have in a booth with that, it's dangerous. We have a lot of impact on the game, but we also have a lot of impact on the show, I like to think as well. When we return, we'll talk Ohio State Buckeyes. That's coming up next on Sports Now.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy.
Hi. How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe. And I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy. Hi.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
We welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington back in the McAfee Heating and Air studio, powered by the TKDS Sports Network. Matt, let's take a look real quick. The Ohio State Buckeyes, we know we live in Ohio. There are a lot of Ohio State Buckeye fans here, including that man right there as well. And when we talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes, obviously their season has been a roller coaster. They are undefeated. They are 5-0, and they're coming off a big win against Maryland. And Matt, during that game, the first half, they struggled against Maryland. And if you recall, back on our Saturday show before that game took place, we said that if you take Maryland lightly, they will come in to the shoe and they will take you down.
And yeah, that was one thing that I heard, I believe it was Joe Klatt say it. And it's not just me agreeing with him because he was the announcer for the Ohio State football game. You put Maryland inside of the ACC, put them inside of the SEC with the schedule that they have had so far this year. Maryland's a top 25 team. They're ranked. I can completely get behind that because Maryland has played against quite a few Power 5 teams so far this season. They were undefeated going into the game against Ohio State, and they've looked good all season long. So the fact that was another thing that also kind of gave Maryland a little bit of an edge in that game, and what gave them a little bit of a motivation boost was the fact that how are we not ranked? We need to go prove to people that we need to be a top 25 team. And even though they ended up losing to Ohio State and getting their first loss of the season, I think the Terrapins kind of showed that maybe they should be a top 25 team in the country because they played a phenomenal game until the Ohio State defense decided to step up and play big. But outside of that, you talk about Ohio State starting off pretty slow. I'm hoping we can see it happen this season with me being a Buckeye fan, but I can't wait to see what this team's going to do if they can play a full 4 quarters. If Ohio State plays a full 4 quarters, they can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the country. But if they play a slower paced game like they started off doing in pretty much every single game so far this season, Ohio State is not going to be able to compete with Michigan later on in the year.
And you know, one thing that favors Ohio State is they have no question marks on that team other than that quarterback position. They have a very stout defense, a very tremendous defense. We've seen that time in and time out so many times this season. That defense for Ohio State that has let them down previous years is certainly stepped up in a big way this season. Of course, their rushing attack is great. They're wide receiver university for a reason. They are wide receiver U for a reason. Of course, with Marvin Harrison Jr., they have such great talent on that offensive side of the football. The only question is, and this has been a question mark all season long, and it will remain a question mark, is that quarterback position. And the reason why I say it will remain a question mark is because there's no other question marks you can put circling around that Ohio State team. Offense, defense, coaching. There are no question marks on that team. So therefore, you have obviously the weak link is going to be the quarterback. No matter what Kyle McCord does, he's going to receive criticism in one way. because of the expectations at Ohio State. And I'll be the first one to admit, I think he's living up to the expectations. I think he has played absolutely tremendous. When you take a look at Colin McCord and what he's been able to do so far this season, he's been phenomenal. 1,375 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, and here's the thing, Matt. Here is the thing. 1 interception. 1 interception. That is big. If you're not turning over the football, that is your biggest key to success. You cannot turn over the football. Yes, he's missed some throws here and there. He's a first-year starter. We have to give him some grace. But the thing is, though, is a lot of the media analysts are not going to give him the grace that he deserves because of how high expectations are right now for Ohio State. I think he's living up to those expectations. And one thing that we've seen with Kyle McCord that I like, he's just gotten better and better and better each week. He's improving. It'd be a little bit different if he was just staying the same or downgrading week in and week out. He's getting better. He's getting a little bit more confident. He's starting to read defenses a little bit better. He's giving better balls. I'm not saying he's been perfect this year, but he's been what Ohio State needs him to be, and he's not done improving.
And that's one thing you talk about. There's no real question marks around Ohio State. The only other question mark that I have right now as a Buckeye fan is the offensive play calling at some points in the game. And one thing that I've noticed with Kyle McCord so far this season, when he gets confident, he will light the defense on fire. So why is Ohio State waiting until later stages of the second quarter to throw the football down the field? That's the only question mark I've got, because when Kyle McCord makes a throw down the field, it happened in the Notre Dame game. You saw his confidence increase. In the game against Maryland, the drive where we actually started trying to get Marvin Harrison Jr. involved in the offense, what happened from that point on? The offense looked good. I'm not saying that Ohio State needs to play number 1 against Purdue next week, throw a 50-yard pass down the field to Marvin Harrison Jr., but what I'm saying is you can't continue to play soft at the beginning of games. Because what that's going to do with Kyle McCord, if he misses a throw underneath, that's going to tank his confidence. He makes a throw down the field that gets caught for a big gain. That is going to boost his confidence. And like I said, when it comes to Kyle McCord, at least from what I've seen so far this season, once he gets that confidence in the game, he starts lighting the field on fire. That's what Kyle McCord has been able to do so far this season. Like I said, I'm not saying that it needs to be play number 1, have Emeka Ibuka come across the middle, draw the safety's eyes towards the middle of the field, and have Harrison on the same side run a streak down the sideline in one-on-one coverage. Not saying that needs to be play number 1 for Ohio State on the road against Purdue, but you need to get Kyle McCord confident as fast as you can. In the beginning of the game against Maryland, he was not confident throwing the football. We kept seeing Ohio State go 3 and out or really not get anything going on drives. It was painful to watch, to say the least. It was painful to watch. And then we saw, like I said, that drive where we started getting Marvin Harrison Jr. a little bit more involved in the offense, started moving the football down the field more efficiently, and that's when it seemed like the offense started gaining some steam and started moving down the field more efficiently. I think when it comes to Ohio State, I think one play call that, you have the playmakers to do it, but it seems like as of recently, at least the past few games, about 50 to 60% of the time it gets called back due to a holding. I don't like the screens out of the backfield. Like I said, you've got the talented receivers to be able to make those kinds of plays, but you rely too much on those explosive route running receivers to block, which on normal stance, Ohio State wide receivers are good at blocking, but when you have a receiver who's used to catching a football and running a route, go into blocking, there's a higher likelihood that a holding is going to be called on the play.
And Matt, any football team we talk about, professional, high school, college, I will always say this is what they need to do, but I think that this fits Ohio State's system great. They have a great rushing attack. Trayvon Henderson in the backfield, obviously he sat out against Maryland, but what Ohio State has in the backfield is one of the best in the nation. The depth that they have in that backfield is absolutely tremendous. To relieve pressure off of Kyle McCord, what you need to do is you need to run the ball early, and that'll open up play action, and you could get the ball downfield to Ibuka or Marvin Harrison Jr. Your playmakers downfield. You can open up play action and get crossing routes down the middle of the field or vertical routes down the middle of the field or up the sideline, wherever you want to run them, it opens up the offense and it opens up the deep passing game because Ohio State, they can run the ball efficiently. You draw those safeties up, that's when you can hit them over the top. With these star-studded receivers that Ohio State has, it'll be there all day. And if defenses say, okay, we want to eliminate the big play, we won't bring those safeties up. Then guess what? Just keep pounding the run game and just keep getting 5 to 6 yards, and you're getting first downs. And that's how you then take long, methodical drives and you keep the ball away from the opposing team's offense. That's one thing I want to see Ohio State do a little bit more against Purdue coming up this week and carrying it in, because after Purdue, they have 2 more tough games against Penn State and then Wisconsin.
I'll tell you what, if you're Ohio State and you're going to try to run the football, the running game hasn't been the greatest that we've seen, at least in recent memory for Ohio State. And that's just because the offensive line isn't getting that good of a push. That's been one of the bigger issues for Ohio State so far this season. The pass protection for the offensive line hasn't been horrible, but the running attack for that offensive line, Ohio State in years past with J.K. Dobbins, then with Henderson, even with Carlos Hyde, they've had, and Ezekiel Elliott, they've had explosive offenses on the ground. There have been explosive plays for Ohio State so far this year when it comes to the ground attack, but it's been few and far between. The rushing attack for Ohio State, you also get the feeling that defenses, when it comes to stopping the run, I don't know if it's something with the formation or what it may be, but defenses are keying in on the Ohio State run game a lot better this year. And I'm not saying, I don't know if it's a formation thing for Ohio State or what it may be, but defenses have been able to stop the Ohio State run game. And then the other thing, like you mentioned, Henderson not playing and not suiting up for that game against Maryland, that was a big hit, and that was a big hit to the potential of the offense. But that was another thing that we started seeing in the later stages of the game, and I absolutely love Mayan Williams. I'm sad that it took until that stage of the game to get him on the football field, because man, he runs with some intensity. It's insane watching Mayan Williams run the football.
And Matt, one thing, you mentioned that Ohio State, the rushing attack hasn't necessarily been there, such as what we've seen it in years past. And I would have to agree with you on that. But at the same time, you have Henderson that's averaging 6.7 yards per carry. That is way more above average. And yeah, maybe it's a down year for the Ohio State rushing attack, unlike years past, but they're still running the ball efficiently. And what can get them back to the numbers that we've seen and we've been used to seeing Ohio State running the football is, believe it or not, just keep pounding the ball. Keep on the ground, keep pounding it, because over time, that defense is going to wear down. They're going to get a little bit lazy. Once they get lazy, that's then when you can open up the air attack as well. I think it just takes stress off of Kyle McCord. I think the offense would be a lot more efficient. But nonetheless, they're 5-0. 3 big games coming up. Purdue, last time they played at Purdue, they were upset. And then Penn State, they're forced to be reckoned with this season. We'll talk about them here in a little bit on this show. And then Wisconsin. Wisconsin has always been a strong team. Of course, they now have first-year coach at Wisconsin, Luke Fickell. He's a common name. He was the former coach of the Cincinnati Bearcats.
And yeah, you talk about that running attack for Ohio State so far this season, the average that Henderson has had so far this year. I was talking about those explosive plays that have come few and far between for the Ohio State the Ohio State run game. I think that's why we're seeing Henderson's numbers be north of 6 yards on average, is because if there's a running back that's going to have those explosive plays at Ohio State, it's going to be TreVeyon Henderson. He is an absolute explosion out of the backfield. And I'm not saying that it's the main reason that he's got that 6.7 yards per carry on average.
Yes.
I'm not saying that the explosive plays are the only reason that he has those kinds of numbers, but the big run against Notre Dame, outside of that, Ohio State wasn't really running the football that well. Henderson didn't even play in the game against Maryland last week. And then you take a look at some of the other games they've played so far this season. Outside of a few explosive runs, the run game for Ohio State hasn't been as dominant as it has been in years past.
Absolutely. It's time for a break. When we return, we're talking about the top 3 teams right now in the Big Ten, which is, of course, the Ohio State Buckeyes, Michigan Wolverines, and Penn State Nittany Lions as well. That's coming up next on Sports Now.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy. Hi.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Come on, guys, let's call Daddy. Hi, Daddy. Hi.
How you doing?
So the furnace is on its last leg, babe, and I just don't know what to do.
I wish I could be there to help.
Being away is always difficult, but it doesn't mean you can't make decisions together. You can count on us to keep your family comfortable.
Hey, buddy, how's it going?
When are you coming home?
It's gonna be soon. Faster than you know it, I'll be home.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Well, there right now is about a 3-headed race for Big Ten, and they're all coming out of that East Division as well. Three of those teams are also ranked top 6 in the AP Top 25 poll. Michigan at 2, Ohio State at 3, Penn State at 6. Matt, we were talking during the break, and you said it hurt your soul being a diehard Ohio State fan, but you're very good at what you do. You're unbiased. And you said that Michigan this season is a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, like I said, it pains me because I have been a diehard Buckeye fan for probably 10 to 15 plus years now, and I'm only 21 years old. But Michigan is a legit scary team this season. They haven't really played anybody so far this year, at least when it comes to the strength of schedule, but they've been dominant so far this year. I mean, they've scored 224 points so far through all of their games this season, and they've only allowed 40. This Michigan Wolverines team is scary, scary good so far this year. And if Ohio State is going to, I talked about Ohio State not playing a full 4 quarters of football yet this season. If Ohio State plays a full 4 quarters of football against Michigan, I'll tell you what, Week 12 is going to be an amazing week for college football.
Week 12 always is an amazing week for college football. It's never short of an amazing week for college football. But, Matt, I get what you're saying. And, you know, one of the things that has really helped Michigan, has really taken the Wolverines to that next level, has been their quarterback, J.J. McCarthy.
And, yeah, he's been – you take a look at what he was expected of being or what he was expected to be capable of a season ago. There wasn't people saying that he was going to be one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football. But since then, he has gone absolutely nuts for the Michigan Wolverines. And not just the fact that they've got J.J. McCarthy, who's been phenomenal at quarterback so far this season. He was really good last season as well. But they've also got a phenomenal rushing attack as well. And that's what makes this Michigan Wolverines team so, so good. They've got a great quarterback. J.J. McCarthy has been phenomenal so far this season. He was phenomenal last season. But they also have one of the best backfields in all of college football being at Ohio State. Michigan's also got one of the best backfields in the entire nation when it comes to college football as well.
How about J.J. McCarthy? His rating overall last season was 155. That's a good rating. This season, 188.5. And last season, he threw 22 touchdowns. This season, we're not even halfway through the whole entire season. He's already sitting at 11. He's already obtained half of the touchdowns that he threw a season ago. He does have 3 interceptions this season. But, one thing that I've seen with J.J. McCarthy that I really, really like seeing out of a young quarterback, and this really just shows his trust in his development. He is not afraid to put the ball in tight windows, and he is not afraid to sling the ball all around the gridiron. Unlike points, not saying the entire season, but unlike certain points that we saw a season ago.
And yeah, that's going to be one. It's going to be one big difference if McCord isn't 100% confident in himself going into the game against Michigan. That's going to be one thing that we're going to see. It's going to be a complete difference in the quarterback play in that game. It's going to be J.J. McCarthy, who is confident as all get out, throwing the football anywhere on the football field. And if Kyle McCord isn't fully confident going into that game against Michigan, you're going to see a very, very, very confident J.J. McCarthy playing against a very less confident Kyle McCord. And as an Ohio State football fan, if that's going to be the case, Michigan's going to be 3-0 throughout the last 3 games against Ohio State.
And we talked about Ohio State. We know what they bring to the table. They've been a little inconsistent this season, but there's still time for them to find that consistency. Michigan, of course, they're the favorite in the Big Ten, rightfully so. They've won it back-to-back years, and they've also been to the college football playoff, rightfully so. This should be Michigan's season, once again, to three-peat. But a team that's lurked in the shadows the entire season. They're ranked 6th right now, but when you think of the Big Ten, especially the Big Ten East, you think of Michigan, Ohio State. Well, Penn State has put together a really, really good season. And I will say this, I'm looking at their stats. There's really no glaring numbers, minus the fact that they take care of the football. That is the biggest thing Penn State can do. Matt, you and I both know if you want to win football games, you can't turn over that football.
Especially when it comes down to when Penn State plays Michigan and when Penn State plays Ohio State and when they even play Maryland at that. When you're in games against very tough opponents, securing the football is key. It doesn't matter what else goes on in the football game. If you cannot secure the football, you are going to have a very tough chance at winning the football game. I just said that it doesn't matter what else is going on in the game. If your offense can't do anything, obviously that's a big problem too. But if you cannot control the football, you're not going to give your offense an opportunity to take control of the game. You're going to be putting your defense on the back foot in some scenarios. If you turn the ball over in your own territory, you're putting your defense on the back foot. So when it comes down to it, if you can secure the football, you give yourself a lot better of a chance of winning the football game. The question is going to be, talk about Penn State, are they going to be able to control the football against, 1, a really good Michigan defense, and 2, a really good Ohio State defense?
And Penn State, they've always been able to run the football really well. I mean, it was like that with Saquon Barkley when he was at Penn State. Penn State always can run the football. How about this season? They've had 8 players record at least 1 rushing attempt on the season. So they've had at least 8 different players through 5 games carry the football at least once. Obviously, you have, Lambert Smith, wide receiver, that's only had 1 time. You have players that have only carried it, but 8 players that have carried the ball at least on 1 attempt. Through 5 games, they are 26 yards shy combined of 1,000 yards. That's pretty efficient running the football. Now, they only average 4.2 yards per carry, but at the same time, really, you need 3.4 yards every single down to get a first down on 3 plays. You just want to average around 3.5 yards per carry. They do 4.2. That's above average. And then you take a look at how many times they've ran the football so far this season. They've ran the football 231 times compared to only throwing the football 172. That is a glaring difference. And in today's modern day era of football, we don't necessarily see those numbers that skewed in the rushing direction.
And yeah, that's going to be another thing that is going to be interesting for Penn State because you talk about they're ranked 6th right now. They've had a phenomenal season so far this year. The big question is going to be, at least from what I've seen for Ohio State, they've got a really good rushing defense. Michigan, they've also got a really good rushing defense. So you talk about Penn State using more of a ground attack on the season. That's going to be the big matchup in the Ohio State game and in the Michigan game, is how successful is that run game going to be against two other teams that are inside the top 5 when it comes to their ranking on the season. Ohio State, one of the best rushing defenses so far this year. Michigan also in that top category, in that top talks when it comes to defenses on the year. So Penn State, you talk about the rushing attack, 8 different players carrying the football. Are the Nittany Lions going to have that kind of success against Ohio State and Michigan? Because if they do, it's going to be a lot different of a game for both Michigan and Ohio State than what they would be expecting if they're able to stop the run. Because if you take away what a majority of the identity of an offense is, that completely flips that team's game plan on its head. For Penn State, if they get the rushing attack going, that's going to change the mindset of the Ohio State defense. And then you talk about throwing the football around, talk about getting the running game established, opens up play action, opens up potential shots down the field. With how Ohio State likes running the defense, if they are so focused on stopping the run, we saw it in the Michigan game last year. If Ohio State is fully focused on stopping the run, you can throw the football down the field. If Ohio State's defense is able to stop Penn State's running attack, that's going to help the Ohio State Buckeyes out a ton.
And, you say that stopping the run, if they can stop the run, it makes Penn State one-dimensional. When you're playing Penn State and that offense, that's certainly what you have to try to do. But when we say stop the run on the show, it is a lot easier said than done, because here's the thing with the run, and this is why running the football has been so effective through the entire length that football has been around. It's smash mouth football. You can know a run is coming, and it is still yet so hard to stop it, because you can scheme against it, but in reality, it's going to become a fist fight. It's going to become a battle in the trenches. Who has the stronger offensive line? A team could run the football every single play of the game. It will still be hard to stop it, no matter what point in the game, because of the battle in the trenches. If you think your offensive line can overpower the defensive line and get into the second wave of tacklers, which would be, in this scenario, the linebackers, you will run the football efficiently. That's why Penn State is so good at running the football. They always have a great offensive line. And we sit here and say, oh, just stop the run. That is so much easier said than done. Look at so many teams, they run the football, and look how effective they are. I mean, we're going to go to the high school level, but the Fairmont Firebirds come to mind. Under Dave Miller, they run the triple option. They run the ball almost every single play. But they're effective in it. And it's because they have the offensive line. It's so hard to stop the run, even when you know it's coming.
Yeah, you talk about high school football where you see that happen. One college team that you think that comes to my mind is Army. You take a look at the success that they've had running the football. They run a triple option offense. They don't throw the football that much. Teams know what's coming when they face off against Army.
Navy used to run the triple option too, and I think they went away with that.
I think they run the football a lot more, but when it comes to throwing it, if you go the Army-Navy game, if you take a look at that, Navy definitely throws the football a little bit more than Army does, but Army still runs a more run-heavy offense.
I believe like 7 years ago they ran the triple option. I think they went away with that.
I'm pretty sure it was either last year or the season before. Michigan struggled against Army. Michigan was a top team in the country when they faced off against Army, and they struggled against that triple option. That goes to show that it doesn't matter how much you know what's coming at you. If the opponent has a solid offensive line, if they can get that push on the offensive line, and they run smash mouth football, it doesn't matter if it's a top 10, top 5 team facing off against Army. Army is going to be in that football game.
And Matt, real quick before we go to break, out of those 3 teams in the Big Ten we mentioned, I will say this. Actually, you know what? We're going to go to break now. We're going to come back. I have a couple of questions. I alluded some other questions off the question I was going to ask you. We're going to take a break. We'll be back. We'll continue the talk when we return.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
All right, we're back here. We are about ready to close out hour number 1 of this 2-hour show. We are live until 6. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We're continuing our talk right now with the Big Ten, and we've talked about, of course, the top 3 teams. Number 2, Michigan. Number 3, Ohio State. Number 6, Penn State. But, Matt, don't let those 3 teams deter you away that there are some teams in the Big Ten that can certainly play some upsets later on in the season.
And yeah, some of the teams that come to mind when you bring that up, me being an Ohio State fan, I personally look at the road game against Purdue coming up for Ohio State. Just
recent history.
Just with what's happened in recent history with Ohio State versus Purdue. But other teams that you also have to keep an eye out for, I would assume all 3 of these teams have been, and one of these teams I talked about, I feel like they should have been ranked going into their game last week, but all 3 of these teams are probably borderline top 25 teams, just outside of it probably. But the teams that I'm looking at outside of Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, I'm looking at Maryland, I'm looking at Iowa, I'm looking at Wisconsin. Those are the 3 teams I'm looking at outside of the top 3 teams that are all ranked inside the top 6 in the nation right now. I'm looking at Wisconsin, the season they've put together so far, only 1 loss. I'm looking at Iowa. I believe they only have 1 loss. In Maryland, they only just got their first loss against Ohio State.
Yeah, and Matt, Maryland, of course, they're going to be squaring off later in the season against Penn State and Michigan. Both of those games are home games. It would not shock me to see Maryland pull out one of those games. I would say mainly against Penn State, just because Michigan is a powerhouse. I think that we're going to see a tale of 2 undefeated teams coming up week 12, Ohio State, Michigan. But Maryland, you can't count them out. That's a team that can pull an upset. And just like I love how you said Wisconsin, Ohio State will square off against Wisconsin here in 3 weeks. And then, of course, Iowa, and that defense for Iowa has always been tremendous.
And yeah, that's one thing that it'd be interesting to see if it ends up coming down to it, but the final week of the regular season, there would have to be a Georgia upset to go along with it, and obviously Ohio State and Michigan would have to stay undefeated throughout the regular season. But how about what could end up lining up? We could see number 1, either Michigan or Ohio State, versus number 2, either Michigan or Ohio State, for the final regular season game for both of those teams on the year. That throws it back to when Ohio State and Michigan were 1 and 2 going into the final game of the regular season so many different times in years past. Obviously, like I said, we'd have to see Georgia get upset at some point down the road, which doesn't seem like that's really going to be the case with how the Bulldogs have been playing. But still, Ohio State, Michigan, it's the one game that all Ohio State and Michigan fans circle on their board when it comes to the season. Obviously, I'm also looking forward to that Ohio State Penn State game, not this weekend, but next weekend at the Shoe. So Yeah, I'm pumped to see what Ohio State is capable of doing throughout the remainder of the season. But like you mentioned, they've also got Wisconsin on the schedule. Wisconsin's got a pretty good season so far going for them. And that's also another thing, too, with Wisconsin. We could see this Badgers team potentially be a top 25 team when they face off against the Buckeyes. If they continue to win, Wisconsin could be a top. I mean, you could say the same for Maryland and Iowa as well. If we see any of those three teams keep winning, we could see any of those three teams make their way inside the top 25 as well.
Matt, you were talking about the Georgia Bulldogs, and when you look at their schedule, they play in a very tough SEC conference. 6 teams in the SEC are ranked in the top 25. A lot of those teams are between 15 and 25, but you're still a top 25 team in the entire nation. I was just looking at the Georgia Bulldogs schedule, and they do play Ole Miss. Ole Miss right now is ranked number 13. They do play Tennessee at Neyland Stadium. Tennessee right now is ranked number 19. So, of course, you could see maybe an upset in those games. And although Missouri just fell out of the top 25, they were top 25. They fell out this past weekend. They are right now borderline. It would not surprise me to see Missouri put up a good fight as well, especially if we saw Auburn put up a good fight at home. Missouri, I think that they could put up a good fight. I'm not 100% sold on the Georgia Bulldogs yet, but I'm getting there. They have some issues. They have been a bit inconsistent at times this season. I think that they deserve the number 1 ranking as of now, but when you go in later in the season, I think that number 1 ranking could be taken away from them. But just as you said, knowing the committee, it's going to have to go with the Georgia upset. They do have some tough games coming up, though.
Yeah, you take a look at that 4-game stretch, because you didn't even talk about the Florida Gators as well in that little bit of a slate
Game is on the road, too.
That they've got coming up. They're at Vandy. Then they've got the 3 home games against Florida, against Missouri, against Ole Miss. Then they're on the road against Tennessee. Then they're on the road against Georgia Tech. If there was a game if there's a game I would see Georgia losing, which I don't see them really losing any of these games, I would see them potentially losing that game to Ole Miss. And that's just because the Rebels have been so good so far this season. Ole Miss has already played some pretty tough teams so far this year, and they're ranked number 13 right now. So when you take a look at potential upsets, yes, that's a home game for the Bulldogs, but we've seen Georgia lose games at home that they shouldn't lose. So when it comes down to it, I would say if there's a game to watch out for if you're Georgia on the rest of the schedule, I would say it's that game against Ole Miss, but things can change. I mean, Missouri, there's a good chance we could see Missouri being ranked by the time those two teams, Georgia and Missouri, face off against each other. But if I had a game circled that I would potentially see an upset happen against the Bulldogs, I'm looking at that game against Ole Miss.
But you want to talk about ranked opponents? Look at what Georgia just did to number 20 at the time, ranked Kentucky, 51-13 win this previous weekend. So Georgia, they're right up there in the thick of things. Matt, going back to the Big Ten, and we'll go back to the nation as well, and all of the colleges across the land. But going back to the Big Ten, going back to the 3-headed race right now between Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. Who's the strongest of those 3? Who's the weakest of those 3?
Strongest right now, Michigan. By far. Michigan is the strongest team of those 3 right now, just because of how complete they've looked so far this season. Weakest team, it's tough to say, but honestly, I might have to go Ohio State, just for the main reason that we have not seen what this team is fully capable of. Ohio State has not played a full 4 quarters of football, where we've seen Penn State play a full 4 quarters, we've seen Michigan play a full 4 quarters of football. If we see Ohio State play a full 4 quarters of football against Purdue and they absolutely destroy the Boilermakers, Ohio State is no longer the weakest team of those 3. But we have not seen that yet from Ohio State. Until we see Ohio State play a full game, they're the weakest team of the 3. Because if you can't play a full game against Penn State, if you can't play a full complete game against Michigan, you are going to lose. That's why I'm putting Ohio State as the weakest team. Yes, they're number 3 in the country. But if I had to choose, I hate saying it because I'm a diehard Buckeye fan, I think the weakest team, not with what they're capable of, but with what we've seen, Ohio State is the weakest of those 3 teams right now.
Matt, I got to agree with you. I think Michigan's the top dogs right now. When you have Blake Corum running the football, that defense has stepped up. J.J. McCarthy has developed just as we foresaw heading into the offseason. Michigan, they're the strongest, and I don't even think that's a question mark in the Big Ten right now. The weakest link, you can have a toss-up. I am going to agree with you with the Ohio State Buckeyes. I've just seen too many inconsistencies with Ohio State. The inconsistencies worry me. But I will also say this. I don't think that they last. And once those inconsistencies are done and over with Ohio State, I very well could see us saying here in a couple weeks that Ohio State is the top team in the Big Ten. The window right now and the range that Ohio State can go in between is it's so broad. Ohio State, if they put it all together, I think that they can be better than Michigan. I think that they can be the top team in the Big Ten. If they don't, I think that they are the weakest of those three teams, and it wouldn't surprise me to see them take an upset to Wisconsin here in a couple weeks. That game comes to mind. So much football to be played, so much still to be told on the season. Ohio State, again, they have such a broad range. They can be the best. They can also be middle of the pack this season. The inconsistencies show me right now they're the weakest out of Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, but that could change just in a few weeks.
This will be the other thing I'll say about the Ohio State Buckeyes, too. On the road against Purdue, we've seen what this game has done in the past to the Buckeyes. If Ohio State in this game plays a full 4 quarters, wins, say, 63-7 or something along those lines, and just absolutely destroys Purdue, there's a chance I might change my mind and put them to the strongest team of those three right now. But it's just because of the fact that Ohio State has not looked complete so far this season. Michigan, they've looked complete so far this year. They've played every team, put up a lead, not look back. You take a look at Penn State. They've looked complete so far this season. They've put up a lead in pretty much every single game. They have not looked back. That has not been the case for Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State, when it comes to strength of schedule, they've played a little bit of a tougher schedule up to this point because Maryland, really good team. Notre Dame, really good team. But if you're a top 3 team in the country right now, there shouldn't be question marks. I mean, the Notre Dame game makes a little bit more sense, but with Maryland, Ohio State was obviously they did end up as the game played out. They did end up covering the spread. And at game time, they were 17-point favorites, but earlier on in the week, they were around 20-point favorites. But it shouldn't take, with how good Ohio State's roster is and how many star-studded players they have on that roster, that spread should have been covered by the third quarter. It shouldn't have taken until the fourth. In the mid-stages of the fourth. It should have taken early to mid-stages of the third quarter for Ohio State to be up by 20-plus points on Maryland. And that's where the inconsistencies come in for this team. If Ohio State were to play if Ohio State plays a full 4 quarters of football and destroys Purdue, they are neck and neck with Michigan for the best team in the Big Ten. If they don't, and if they play like they have played so far this season and they're not playing a full 4 quarters of football, they're still, in my mind, the weakest team of those three.
I think you summed it up perfectly. I completely agree with you. I know shows like this, to get viewership, we have to disagree, but I can't. I agree with you. Our first hour comes to a close. When we return, we'll talk about the entire top 25. We'll be back here on the TKDS Sports Network Sports Now.
It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. It's easy to take the air in your home for granted. But it's not just about being hot or cold. It's about having clean air. For some of us, this is critical. At McAfee, we'll provide you with long-term solutions to improve the air you breathe.
Do you need your inhaler, bud?
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Hour number 2 of this 2-hour show. We are live until 6. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We just spent the entire first hour practically talking about the announcer's jinx and how it is real. And then, of course, the Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, who's the strongest, who's the weakest. Matt, now let's open it up to the entire country, and let's open it up to every single conference for college football. Let's talk about the top 25. Anything in the top 25 that surprises you?
Well, there was one that I was going to pick, but you told me not to because it's what you're going to pick. But Washington State being ranked 19th, with what Washington State has been able to do the past few seasons, they haven't been one of the top dogs in the Pac-12 for a little bit. Granted, when you take a look at the Pac-12, they've got teams thrown pretty much everywhere inside the top 25 right now. But when it comes down to teams that people were expecting from the Pac-12 to be towards the top and be inside the top 25, I mean, you've got Oregon, you've got Washington, you've got USC, you've got all three of those teams. Utah, they're still a top 25 team. UCLA coming into this season, they were a team that I expected to be right around 20 to 25 once all was said and done. They're currently 18th. Oregon State's having a pretty good season so far, but they did get DJ Uiagalelei from Clemson, so that's a big help for the Beavers. But Washington State, that's not a team that I expected to be 4-1 at this point of the season and be inside of the top 25 at this point of the season.
Matt, you know, I told you at the break, and I said I found it first, so don't steal it from me. Louisville. The Louisville Cardinals, University of Louisville right now sits at 14. And we talk about Louisville, and the Cardinals have not been able to do practically anything for football when you talk about history. Obviously, they had Lamar Jackson. He won Heisman there. But outside of Lamar Jackson playing at Louisville, Louisville has been known more as a basketball-baseball school. They have not been known for a football school. They play in the ACC, a very tough conference when it comes to football. We all know that. Right now, they're sitting at 6-0. They were number 20 when they faced Notre Dame. They ended up beating Notre Dame. Notre Dame dropped to 21. Louisville shot all the way to 14. And the Cardinals are really making a case. And if they keep winning, it won't be long before they're in the top 10.
And yeah, the big question for Louisville is going to be, are they going to be able to keep this success up? Obviously, like you mentioned, big win against Notre Dame last week. That really, it made sense that it propelled them a lot further up in the rankings, and Notre Dame dropping down to 21 as well. But when it comes down to it, there have been a few teams so far this season, and we talked about the two of them. Another team that you also talk about being more of a basketball school that's inside the top 25 right now. You take a look at Kansas. I mean, last year they did it roughly at this point of the season. They were a ranked team around this point of the year. But with what Kansas has had as a football program in recent memory, it's pretty much been nothing for football, for at least when it comes to recent memory for the Kansas Jayhawks. And now, second straight season where we see them jumping inside the top 25 at around the midway point of the season. It's nice seeing Kansas in there, and you also talk about another basketball school that's more known, or another school that's more known for basketball that's inside the top 25. How about Duke being at 17 as well?
Yeah, that's another thing. Duke, of course, they had a couple of upsets early on in the season. What an incredible season that the Duke Blue Devils have put together. And Matt, you know, here's another thing, and I'm not going to say it's a surprise seeing this team sitting at number 11, but I will say it surprises me in a sense, and I'm just going to go out and say it's the Alabama Roll Tide. Alabama this season, with how many people have written off the Crimson Tide, it really with how many people have written off the Crimson Tide, it just boggles my mind because you would have thought that they would have been outside the top 20. And that just goes to show you the strength that Alabama's been over the last couple decades, especially with Nick Saban. A down year for Alabama. They're still sitting at 5-1. They're spot 11. And Alabama, they're still in the thick of things for a possible playoff berth.
And yeah, you take a look at Alabama when it comes to the SEC, at least in the West. They're currently the only team that hasn't lost in conference in the SEC West so far this season. You have LSU 3-1, Ole Miss 2-1, Texas A&M 2-1, Alabama's 3-0. Then you take a look at the East. You have Georgia, who's 3-0. They're undefeated on the season. Kentucky, Florida, both 2-1 when it comes to conference play so far this year. So Alabama currently sits as the 11th ranked team right now. But when all's said and done, Alabama could easily be an SEC in the SEC championship game, more than likely against Georgia. And if Alabama keeps winning throughout the remainder of this season, LSU's going to be on that schedule. They're currently ranked 22. So there's a chance that if Alabama keeps winning, and if they end up taking down Georgia in the SEC championship game, it's going to be tough to put Alabama in, but it's also going to be tough to leave them out if they win the SEC championship game. And the reason I say it's going to be tough to put them in is because Alabama this year has looked nothing like what Alabama has looked like in the past.
And, Matt, that's the point I'm trying to make. They look nothing like they've been in the past, so everybody is writing them off, but here they are, one loss team sitting in rank 11. And with how bad people have wrote them off, you would think that they would be outside the top 25 in general. But no, according to Alabama standards, obviously, it's a down year. But they're still having a better season than almost anybody else in college football would want, minus the 10 teams in front of them.
And yeah, you take a look at the schedule for Alabama throughout the remainder of the season. They've got Tennessee, LSU, Kentucky. Those are 3 straight games for the Crimson Tide. And then obviously you got the game against Auburn for the final game of the season. If there's any game that we've been looking at schedules for teams expecting or thinking of what we expect to see from these teams, it's a road game for Alabama against Auburn. We've seen what that game has done in recent memory. If there's any game on the schedule for Alabama throughout the remainder of the season that could completely knock out any chances of them making it into the college football playoff, it's going to be that game against Auburn. It's going to be.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The SEC is going to be absolutely crazy, and coming up, and especially in the next couple of years, because you now have Texas and Oklahoma coming over from the Big 12, play in the SEC. And then, of course, the Big Ten. We were talking about the Big Ten, and look at how many schools that they're obtaining as well.
And yeah, that's one thing that me personally, I don't get why the Big Ten is bringing in Washington, Oregon, UCLA, and USC, just for the main reason that it would have made sense to maybe see, obviously Cincinnati's now in the Big 12, but it would have made sense seeing teams like Cincinnati get moved into the Big Ten, teams like maybe West Virginia moving into the Big Ten. Not teams on the West Coast, because the Big Ten is more of a Midwest conference. That's where pretty much almost all of the teams for the Big Ten reside. Obviously, you have to take away Rutgers, Maryland. They're not really in the Midwest. They're more East Coast. But when it comes down to where teams in the Big Ten are from, you think Midwest. Why are there West Coast teams now going to be inside of the Big Ten? It does increase the competition level, and I do like that aspect of it. But the Big Ten has been teams out of the Midwest forever, pretty much. It's been teams from the Midwest, and that's what's made it the Big Ten. So now that there's teams out of the West Coast coming in, and that's the other interesting thing, how is that going to shake up the East and the West? What teams from the West are going to move into the East? Was there going to be a team from the East that I wouldn't expect it to happen with where all these teams are located and with the fact that the Big Ten is moving more west? But you take a look, what's the mix-up going to be like? Are we going to see maybe, I would I would assume Purdue's probably going to move to the East just because they're out of Indiana. Then it's going to be a question of, do we throw Illinois in? Do we throw Northwestern in to the East? It's just going to be interesting to see the redraw of the East and the West inside of the Big Ten. But like I said, I do like the fact that when it comes to the competition level, bringing in UCLA, bringing in USC, Washington, Oregon. I mean, you take a look, all of those teams are currently ranked. UCLA is the worst team at 18, and then you've got 3 teams inside the top 10. Imagine if the Big Ten were if all of those teams were in the Big Ten now, you'd be seeing Michigan 2, Ohio State 3, then you'd have Penn State at 6, Washington, I believe Washington's 7, right? Or is it's Washington or Oregon? Those are 7 and 8. And then you'd have USC at 10. You'd have 6 of the top 10 teams in the country right now being inside of the Big Ten. So it's going to increase the competition level. I think Washington's number 7. But it's going to increase the competition level when it comes to teams to play in the schedule on the season for any team inside of the Big Ten. So I do like the competition aspect of it, but it feels like reaching for me for the Big Ten. That's all I gotta say on that. It's weird knowing that the Big Ten is more of a Midwestern conference, and there's going to be 4 teams on the West Coast now joining the conference.
And, one thing with what we've seen so far and with the conference change, and I don't agree with I'm old school. I'm a traditionalist. I like seeing the West Coast conferences, the East Coast conferences, the Midwest conferences, the South conferences. I'm more of a traditionalist like that. But one benefit that we will see as fans is more competition. And you know how SEC fans, they like to say ACC bias. ACC fans like to say Big Ten bias. Big Ten fans like to say SEC bias. It's like a circle effect on, oh, well, this conference has bias when it comes to the AP Top 25. I think you can almost eliminate that by the amount of competition that these teams are going to be playing moving forward. And the 12-team playoff, with the amount of competition these teams are playing, is going to be insane, because now you're going to start seeing teams playing better competition. They may finish 8-4, but still find a way to make the playoffs as the 12 or 11 seed. We don't know how that's going to work out. Nonetheless, it's just going to bring a lot, and I mean a lot more competition to college football.
I haven't been paying attention to what moves are going to the ACC, but isn't it like Cal and Stanford are trying to, if they haven't already, they're trying to make a push for the ACC? It's the Atlantic Coast Conference. Atlantic, not Pacific. Pacific. It's mind-boggling, and I would assume I would hope there's going to be name changes, because you can't say it's the Atlantic Coast Conference and have teams in California inside of that conference, with that being the name of it. That's a small little detail that is something that came to my mind, but it's like, I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Jackson. I think that the number of conferences that were around wasn't that big of an issue. There were 5 conferences. The only issue that can be brought up is the fact that with the 14 playoff, which isn't going to be a thing, it's moving to 12 teams. But with a 14 playoff, it was guaranteed you were more than likely going to not have a conference champion inside the playoff. But now with the 12-team playoff, pretty much every conference champion, no matter what seed it's going to be, whether it be ACC, whether it be Big Ten, if we still had Pac-12, Big 12, Big Ten, ACC, SEC, if we still had all 5 of those conferences with all of the teams that were in them before all chaos started breaking loose. If we had all the teams inside of those conferences with a 12-team playoff, every single conference champion would have been in. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Every single conference champion would have been inside of the postseason, or would have been inside of the playoffs. So I'm not saying that that's the reason we've seen all the changes and all the moves and all the craziness that we've seen in the past few seasons, but it was one thing that I had heard talked about a little bit. A conference champion not having a chance of even making it into the playoff, and that's something. I'm not saying that's the reason teams are changing what conference they're in, but it wouldn't have been an issue had all the conference remained the same, with the fact that the 12-team playoff is coming further down the line.
Completely agree. Time for a break. We'll be back.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Well, we welcome you back here to Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. We were cracking jokes at the break. So
Disclaimer, this segment is going to be fun.
No.
Yes, it is.
It won't
yes,
be. It won't be.
Yes, it is.
It's going to be fun because we have a lot to talk about. But, Matt, I know that over the last couple of weeks, we've seen Caleb Williams, the star quarterback for USC. He is projected to be the #1 overall pick. He says that if he returns to college next season, he can make more money staying in college rather than going to the NFL. What's your take on that? Because obviously with the new college football deals and with the new college deals and NCAA deals in general, you can make money now off your likeness. And
Say it. Say NIL. You were
NIL.
There you go.
NIL.
Put it in a sentence. You were struggling with that at the break. That's what we were laughing at. He kept saying NLI. Well, we're trying to put it in a
It's a tongue
sentence.
twister. And no,
For you it is.
Anyway, so
Let's hear it. In a sentence, go.
no.
You have to do it now. Go. Go.
Nope. Anyway, so you can make deals on. Now I lost my train of thought, Matt. You completely distracted me.
You can make deals based off of your name, image, and likeness, not name, likeness, and image. But I feel like you're going along the lines of asking me how I think about it. I would assume that's where you're going.
So
with all this.
going back a couple years ago, you go to the NFL. There's no question about that to make money. You go to the NFL, you make your money. But now because of all the deals that are in NCAA, you now have the option, and players are now going to return more to college football, college basketball, college baseball, wherever they're at, to try to make more money there. Now, when you take it the long term, obviously, the NFL is the way to go. But when we were growing up, Matt, obviously neither one of us were D1 athletes, but growing up, we were always told that if we were a D1 athlete, you go to where the money is. If somebody offers you a contract for minor league baseball rather than college baseball, you go to the minor leagues because that's where the money is. But now we're starting to see players starting to make money off of their name in college, where they're starting to make more money than professionals as well. Caleb Williams says he's open to returning for USC. There's only 5 NFL teams that he'd be willing to play for if he were to join the NFL next season. Now, we're getting into all of that in a minute, but if you're a college kid, say you're in Caleb Williams' situation, do you still go pro, or do you stay in college that extra year, make more money, and in the long term, you could make more money because you have a pro career after that, but at the same time, you also are risking it because injuries happen?
I think, personally, with a player at Caleb Williams' level and what he's been able to do at the college level, if he's going to a team that is going to waste away his career in the NFL, I think he should stay in college. And just for the main reason that you talk about following the money, there's a chance that both years there's a really good chance he's going to go to a team that is not going to have enough pieces around him for Caleb Williams to see success right away. When it comes down to it, if I were in Caleb Williams' shoes with the capabilities that I've had and what I've shown so far at the college level, unless it's a terrible injury, if it's a calf strain, something along the lines of what we saw happen to Joe Burrow, if it's an ankle injury, anything along those lines that might happen, not saying anything is going to happen to Caleb Williams, but if he decides to come back and he gets injured and it's something along those lines, I don't think that's really going to hurt his draft stock whatsoever.
We're talking, obviously, we never want to see this happen, but ACL injuries.
Exactly.
Shoulder injuries, stuff like that can affect your throwing motion for not a couple of weeks, but a long period of time.
And yeah, that's the other thing, too, that comes to my mind. When you take a look at potential for injuries in college football as opposed to potential injuries in the NFL, I would say probably there's a higher likelihood of getting injured in the NFL just for the reason that it's a little bit faster paced than you see in college football. I'm not saying that college football isn't fast paced and you're not going to get injured playing college football, but when it comes down to chances of injuring yourself, I would feel more confident in saying that injuries are far more likely to happen when you make it to the NFL level. I mean, you take a look at all the NFL talents that have had so much potential get derailed by an injury, and then you never hear from that player again. It happens so much in the NFL. College football, it happens sometimes, but then you'll see the next season that player come back and have a good year. So when it comes down to it, if I were in Caleb Williams' shoes, just because of what I've been able to show on the football field, if he's going to end up going to a team that, like I said, is going to waste his potential in the NFL, I would stay in college for another year.
You know, Matt, you say waste this potential, and don't get me wrong, I definitely think there are some teams in the National Football League that just do not know how to develop a quarterback. And I know anybody out there watching has some teams come to mind, but at the same time, we've had players such as Joe Burrow went into a, let's be honest, he went into a very bad situation in Cincinnati. A 2-14 team. The team was aging. They had to get an infusion of youth. And in his first year, obviously the ACL injury, came back his second year, went to a Super Bowl. Take a look at Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence, not a great year, first year in Jacksonville. Second year, went to the playoffs, won a playoff game, and lost to the Chiefs, a very close game in the AFC Divisional in his second season in the league. So from what we've seen over recent memory, especially the last couple of seasons, a quarterback, a star-studded quarterback coming out of college, such as Joe Burrow, such as Trevor Lawrence, it takes them about a year to get their feet wet, and then the team gels around them, and then that next year, they're in the playoffs, they're ready to go. I think Caleb Williams deserves that same respect. I'm not saying that's going to happen in any situation he comes out to be, but nobody expected Joe Burrow in his second year with the Cincinnati Bengals to be in the Super Bowl. Nobody expected Trevor Lawrence with the Jacksonville Jaguars to be toe-to-toe with the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC divisional round in his second season. So saying Caleb Williams gets drafted by a team, everybody may already write him off, but you can't. You have to give him a couple of years. You have to give that team a chance because, as we know, quarterbacks, that caliber of star-studded quarterbacks coming out of college can elevate a team already to the next level and completely change their dimensions of the team, their demographics of the team, and can automatically make them a playoff caliber team.
The other reason I slightly disagree with you in that aspect, because we're talking about should Caleb Williams move on to the next level or should he stay in college for another year? When it comes down to talking about Trevor Lawrence, when it comes down to talking about Joe Burrow, they didn't have the option to go back and make more money off of NIL deals going back to play college. Obviously, those players were graduating. They couldn't come back to play football, but
good point.
When it comes down to it, you talk about star-studded players moving on to the NFL and could change a team. Another player that comes to mind when we were bringing up potential injuries for players, RG3. Phenomenal college football player. Phenomenal when he was initially in the NFL. Leg injury derailed everything. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Caleb Williams, but it's possible. You can never throw that possibility out of the equation. And for Caleb Williams, I talk about going back to college to get more out of NIL deals. My mindset on it is, since it's been given to players, make that money while you can. Obviously, if you go to the NFL and you end up surviving that rookie contract and playing really good,
there's a lot of money
there's
after
a
that.
lot of money after it, but it's never guaranteed in the NFL. So when it comes down to it, my personal opinion is Caleb Williams, go get the money. If it's a potential first round, if it's a number 1 overall pick, you're going to get a ton of money as a number 1 overall pick. But if you're going to a team that doesn't have an offensive line, there could be an injury right around the corner.
And, I'm also going to say this. I think that we will more than likely see Caleb Williams return to USC for another season because of the more money. And he mentions 5 teams he would play. The only 5 teams he would play for next season would be the Cowboys, Raiders, Vikings, Giants, and 49ers. And Matt, I'm sorry, I don't see any of those 5 teams picking number 1 overall.
Unless we see trades.
I do not think any one of those teams will finish at the end of the year with the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Especially not the 49ers or the Cowboys or teams like that. They're definitely not going to have the number 1 overall pick.
And do you really think that teams, it's hard to be willing, I think the only team this season that may be willing to trade the number 1 overall pick would be the Chicago Bears because they still have faith in Justin Fields.
I can agree with that.
And I mean, the Bears obviously are the Bears. They haven't had a great season, but it's still they're by no means the worst team in the National Football League right now. That would be
Carolina.
The Panthers. Carolina Panthers. Took the words right out of my mouth. Time for a break. We'll be back. TKDS Sports Now.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, And now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Well, during the break, it was an entertaining break, and I'm happy, but I also wish that all the viewers out there could see what Matt and I do during the breaks as well. This break, Matt was yelling at his computer because obviously new studio. We're still trying to figure out service and Wi-Fi in here. We're connected to Ethernet for the broadcast, and Matt, he really is just complaining that his laptop is not working and loading, whereas mine is because I have the luxury of being connected to Ethernet.
I have been looking
And then he was mimicking me, what I was saying. It was funny. It could have been a comedy show, but
I have been staring more at can't reach this page than I have the standings for any conference inside of college. It's a good thing it's college football talk today because I like college sports a lot more than I like professional sports. But I have been staring at can't reach this page for the entire show, it feels like. I have not been able to get I'm not been able to see anything.
It could be worse. It could be worse. For anybody who was watching yesterday's show, we had a third co-host. It was a fly that was flying around, landing on our faces, our mics, the computer, all of our equipment yesterday. He is not here today.
For half the show, I was doing, you would see my hand, move around. I wasn't trying.
Pulled out our karate.
I wasn't trying to, do any sign language or anything. It was the fly getting on my microphone, flying in my face. I was like, dude, just leave me alone. It would be so much nicer if you just stayed, back in that corner behind me.
Well, he's gone. He's not here today.
If he would have just stayed there and, just...
Now, since we're talking about it, we opened up the show with the broadcaster's jinx, the announcer's jinx. Now he's going to come right back.
He's just going to come flying out of, the vent we've got up in the
Oh,
ceiling
you were talking about me?
I heard my name. I'm coming down to say hi. And I would rather not have that be the case. But
oh, boy. We're continuing college football. Obviously, a lot of hype surrounding the University of Colorado and the Buffaloes with new head coach Deion Sanders. A terrific start they got off to. Lost big against Oregon. They bounced back. They did not beat USC, but they kept them very, very close. They finally got back in the win column. They're now sitting at 4-2 after winning against Arizona State. And Matt, you and I both said beginning of the year, Colorado, who was a one-win football team a season ago, they weren't going to shoot up the ranks. What they've done this season has been more than what anybody in college football has expected from them. Their viewership is up. Their attendance is up. Deion Sanders is Coach Primetime, as we're calling him on this show. He is building something special at the University of Colorado. But you and I even said on this show before we were 5 days a week, it's going to take a year or two to get his full recruits in the door, and before we start seeing a major impact. When I mean major impact, I'm talking college football playoff at the University of Colorado. Time's coming. It's not going to happen this year, but it is coming.
And yeah, when it comes down to the culture at Colorado, that's one thing that has been absolutely flipped on its head. I mean, you take a look at Colorado the past few seasons when it comes to college football. I believe it was around 2017, 2018, between 2017 and 2019, somewhere around that time. They found themselves just outside of the top 25, but since those years, Colorado has been a pretty much nothing team when it comes to Pac-12 play. And with what Coach Prime has done for the Colorado Buffaloes so far this season, 4-2 so far this year, what I expected from Colorado was around, at the very beginning of the year, I expected 7-5, maybe something along those lines, because it wasn't just Deion Sanders going to Colorado to be the coach. It was all the transfers that he brought into the team as well. And I knew that that was going to be a big, big improvement from a 1-11 team that we saw last year. So I expected Colorado to be a better team, but the one thing that it was, I wouldn't say it was super annoying, but it was slightly annoying at right around week 2 or 3 of the season was when they were 2-0 at the start of the season, then 3-0 after taking down Colorado State in OT. People were trying to say that this is one of the best teams in all of college football when they had just gone to OT and barely beat Colorado State.
What a game that was.
Then that was an amazing game. I'm not taking that away from it. It was an amazing game. I watched pretty much every single second of it.
I went to bed because I had to work the next morning. But I had to wait. I think I had to work at like 6 a.m. the next morning. And so I went to bed at a decent time, and then I woke up, and I was like, man, it would have been so worth it to stay up late to watch that game.
And yeah, and then you take a look at the game against Oregon, how that game went for Colorado. That was kind of, at least from what I've seen so far this year, that was kind of the wake-up call for Colorado, and it was kind of what I expected. That's the other thing, too. I expected that game against Oregon to be somewhat like that. I did not expect Colorado to really be able to do much, but they turned it around in that game against USC. Granted, it was only come from behind, but still, keeping it that close with a top 10 team shows what this Colorado team is capable of. I think once all is said and done, Colorado could be right around the 20. I'd say 15 to 25 would probably be around the area that I would be comfortable putting Colorado once the regular season comes to a close, because they're going to have a tough schedule. They still have some tough teams to play this year, but this Colorado team, there's a possibility that this team could be a top 25 team once the regular season comes to a close. But the other thing that you can't have happen, you can't have games like you had against Arizona State be that close.
Yeah, and you know, Matt, one thing that Colorado right now, a win is a win. And they're playing games that necessarily should not be close. And in college football, a win is a win, but at the same time, a win isn't necessarily a win when it comes to college football. Not like we see it in the NFL, but for Colorado, a win is a win. They had one win last season. One. And so far, they've started off the season 4-2. 2 goals I want to see Colorado hit this season. Number 1, I want to see them win a bowl game. No matter what bowl game. It could be a no-name bowl game nobody's ever heard of.
Like the Idaho Potato Bowl or something like that. Because I'm not sure if that's still a bowl game, but I know it has been in the past.
You know, it could be the Jackson Lightcap bowl game. I don't know. Maybe
Hawaii
nobody's
Bowl.
ever heard of it. Colorado, for them to be able to get in, they have to qualify for a bowl game, finish above 500, and they have to win the bowl game. And not only that, I'd like to see them in top 25. If both of those things go right for Colorado, think about the confidence and the momentum they will have heading into the 2024 season. Not to mention, Matt, during their couple of losses, they lost one possession to a very good USC team. Obviously, USC's defense has not been to the caliber that we expected to, but at the same time, Colorado, they were missing their star player, Travis Hunter. With Travis Hunter in that game, do you think that's a different outcome? Because I don't think it's out of the question.
Talking about the USC game?
Yes. They lost 48-41.
I feel like with Travis Hunter on the football field, we could have seen that game go to OT. I'm not saying that game would have been completely flipped and we would have seen Colorado win, say, 41-28.
I don't think it would have been a blowout either way.
Or something along those lines. But when you've got a player at Travis Hunter's caliber who's able to play efficiently both at cornerback and wide receiver and be one of your most explosive players on the offense and then be one of your best lockdown corners on the defensive side, it doesn't matter what you say, not having him on the football field is going to hurt that team and hurt the outcome of a game. It doesn't matter what you think. When you have that kind of player who has that big of an impact on the defensive side, who has that big of an impact on the offensive side, not just, he's had games this season where he didn't get many catches, but he's drawing coverage his way. He's drawing double coverage his way because he's that talented of a player. So even if you see him maybe get 2 catches for 25 yards, you're like, dude, he had a terrible game. It doesn't matter if a receiver gets 2 catches for 25 yards. It depends on the impact that they had in the football game. And with Travis Hunter not in the game, that completely changes how the offense is going to run. It changes slightly how the defense is going to be playing on the football field. So Travis Hunter being on that football field is definitely something that would have helped Colorado against USC.
And Matt, when you are the star player, it is a blessing to receive those double coverages, sometimes triple coverages. And you really start to see the offense improve once your star caliber receiver gets those double coverage looks, because then that means it's really man-to-man coverage everywhere else. If you have some decent receivers around, that they step up. And one team that comes to mind, I want to look at the Houston Texans. DeAndre Hopkins, when he was a Houston Texan, used to receive 2 to 3 men covering him every single play. What did that open up the offense to do? Who did we see take off in Houston during that time? Brandon Cooks.
And Will Fuller. Both of those two played phenomenally with DeAndre Hopkins being the leading receiver. So, yeah, you talk about taking away that coverage and being that star player that's able to bring up double coverage. I mean, you can even take a look at Ohio State so far this season. Marvin Harrison Jr. pretty much getting double covered almost every single play. What does that do? That opens up receivers like Emeka Ibuka. That opens up receivers like Julian Fleming. That opens up Cade Stover to be more open on the football field.
And another team, another local team, back in 2015, the Cincinnati Bengals. They had A.J. Green. Look at how many times he was double and triple covered. Who stepped up that year? Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones. After they left Cincinnati to try to become wide receiver ones, they weren't wide receiver one calibers. Both of them put together a decent career being wide receiver twos. Marvin Jones obviously still in the league, so obviously he's put together a really great career. But they weren't the same caliber players what we saw in Cincinnati because they were getting that man coverage look.
And yeah, the only player that of those few that it's a little surprising that it didn't translate as much, but Mohamed Sanu, when he went to Atlanta, Julio Jones was in Atlanta at that time. It was a little bit surprising, and it might have just been the chemistry that quarterback and receiver that Mohamed Sanu
system maybe as well.
Yeah, that Mohamed Sanu didn't see with Matt Ryan, but when it comes down to it, it goes to show you talk about the coverage and the play style, having A.J. Green, having that double coverage being pulled his way. In the scheme of the offense, when you have that type of star player, in their mind when they're getting double covered, they're if they're not a selfish player, they're thinking, I am. And Julio Jones comes to mind too, because you take a look at the seasons he had where he was getting pretty much covered almost every single play. There were seasons where it took him until week 7 to score his first touchdown of the year, but he came out and even said, he was like, I'm fine with getting double covered. That helps my other guys get open. And that's what you love seeing from a player. If you have a player that is that talented, is that capable on the football field, they're drawing double coverage, and they are perfectly fine with it, and their mindset is, everybody else is getting open. You guys can bring 3 guys over to me if you want to. I don't care. Do it. That's going to help my team. You absolutely love having that on any level of football, whether it's high school, college, professional. If you have that kind of player who's not selfish and is all about the team, you absolutely love having that football player on the field.
And then, Matt, when you take away the double coverage because the other players around you are stepping up, that's when that star player will come through big time. It's time for a break. Final 15 minutes of the show coming up next.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee. Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.
Well, we will finish out this show. We have about 10 minutes or so left in this Tuesday episode of Sports Now. Make sure to tune back in tomorrow when we continue talking professional and college sports. That's all coming up tomorrow on Sports Now. Jackson Lightcap alongside Matthew Pennington. And Matt, let's get right into it. Let's spend the last 10 minutes and let's talk about the Cincinnati College, the Cincinnati Bearcats. Cincinnati Bearcats under new head coach, Coach Satterfield, has taken over from Louisville, has come on to Cincinnati. And Matt, it was a promising start. Back-to-back wins against Eastern Kentucky and Pittsburgh. A blowout win against Eastern Kentucky, certainly something that they should have done. A big win against Pittsburgh, and then a 3-game losing streak. They lost to Miami, Ohio, 31-24 in OT at home. They lost to Oklahoma, who's ranked at the time number 16, but Oklahoma, they have shot up the ranks, especially after their big win against Texas. They only lost by 2 scores against a playoff caliber team, Oklahoma, losing by 2 scores. That's a good sign for Cincinnati. Had some people's hopes up, had some fans' hopes up, and then they lost by 8 against BYU. They had a bye week. Cincinnati should be refreshed, and they have a couple winnable games coming up against Iowa State and Baylor.
And yeah, you take a look at what UC has been able to do so far this season. That loss against Miami should have never happened. Not at all. It was an OT loss. That should have been a win for the Bearcats. They should be right now sitting at 3-2 on the season. The games that you take a look at, and I didn't expect them to win against Oklahoma, but the fact that they kept it as close as they did, only a 2-possession game, once all was said and done, that's a pretty good sign for the UC Bearcats. And then the game against BYU, it was a Friday night football game, so not saying that played too much of a factor into it, but BYU also, in recent memory, has been a pretty decent team, to say the least. BYU's always that team that's just around 15 to 25 ranking once the season comes to a close, and they're usually a team that just kind of hovers around that level. They're usually an 8 to a 9, maybe 10-win team once all is said and done. So the loss for UC against Miami should have never happened. The loss against Oklahoma, there were times where it looked like UC was looking pretty good in the game, but then it was Oklahoma, being a great team. And then that loss to BYU, like I said, I believe 35-27 was the final score of that game. 8-point loss on a Friday night game hurts UC, but it was one thing that I talked about as well. They had a bye week last week. I think after that 3-game skid, that was the best time they could have had a bye week because now, like you mentioned, they've got Iowa State. They've got Baylor coming up next. Those are 2 games that we could see this Bearcats team be 4-3 after those 2 games. But if not, it's not that it's panic mode on the season, but it's going to be a lot tougher for the Bearcats to make a bowl game if they can't win against Iowa State and if they can't win against Baylor.
You know, Matt, and just as you mentioned, I mean, you take a look at Cincinnati's schedule, and Cincinnati's schedule after Iowa State and after Baylor, they have Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State has put together a really nice team on the football field last couple of years. Then they go in with a familiar foe, University of Central Florida. They've played them in the AAC for so long. Both of those teams moved over to the Big 12, so familiar foe there. But UCF, from what we've seen from them this season, obviously they had that crushing loss against Baylor where Baylor ended up coming all the way back. But then after UCF, they have Houston, West Virginia, both of those games on the road going to be very tough. And then they close out at home against 23-ranked Kansas. Tough schedule.
I'm taking a look at that schedule and running through it. Iowa State could be a win. Baylor, that game could be a win. Is the Oklahoma State at home or away?
Away.
That's an away game. I see that being a loss for the Bearcats. Then West Virginia, Houston, you said?
UCF, Houston.
UCF, Houston. I'm only asking because
UCF is home.
I'm only asking because my laptop still is not loading. I cannot load a single thing. Even on my phone, I can't load anything. So I'm asking Jackson for the schedule. So UCF, home or away?
Home.
That should be a win. Houston, you said Houston, West Virginia are away games, right?
Yes.
I could still see the Bearcats winning those games. And then the last game against Kansas.
Kansas home.
I could see UC taking down Kansas. Just for the main reason that, not saying it's going to be the same thing we saw with Kansas a season ago, but Kansas last year, at around this time, they were a top 20. They found their way into the top 25. Once the regular season ended, Kansas was not even in talks of being a top 25 team. Not saying that's going to be the same case this year for the Jayhawks, but you take a look at what UC is capable of on the season. We talked about what Ohio State's capable of, what Penn State's capable of, what a bunch of different teams are capable of. With what we've seen from the UC Bearcats, if they play to their potential, they are going to be an above 500 team at the end of the regular season. But if we see the kind of struggles that we saw against Oklahoma when it comes to turning the football over, this Bearcats team probably going to be around 500, maybe a 7-5 team, maybe worse at the end of the regular season. But being optimistic, this Bearcats team could easily be a 7 or an 8-win team at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, being optimistic, but Matt, I really do think that these next 2 weeks for Cincinnati, it is a big test. Iowa State is entering this game on Saturday 3-3. UC is entering this game 2-3. That should be a good game, and it should be a good test and a good gauge to see where both of those teams sit. If Cincinnati's able to escape that one, they got to take down Baylor. I just think that there's a lot of good gauges and a lot of great gauges to see where the University of Cincinnati Bearcats team is coming after a bye. If we see them reach their full potential, I agree with you. I think that they can be an 8 to 9 win team this entire season. But if they don't, I do think that this is a team that could also finish below 500, sitting at a 4-8 or a 5-7 record. Again, just as we talked about the Buckeyes with their full potential, it's such a broad range on what they can do with that. Same thing, I'd even give the University of Cincinnati Bearcats a broader range of what they can do. Again, I think their ceiling is a 9-win team. I think their floor, well, I'm not going to say a 9-win team because they've already lost there. I don't think that they went out. I think their ceiling is a 7 to 8 win team. Their floor is a 4 to 5 win team. And that is a crazy difference for the Bearcats because now you're talking about a bowl game, for sure bowl game, to no chance at a bowl game.
And yeah, I think when it comes down to what we're going to see for UC throughout the remainder of the season, it's going to come down to these next 2 games against Iowa State and against Baylor. if UC struggles in both of those games and they end up going 0-2, I think we're going to see that 4-win team that you just mentioned. Because they've got some games on their schedule down the line that should be wins. But if we see them take down Iowa State, if we see them take down Baylor, they can easily be a bowl team once the regular season comes to a close. But it's all going to come down to how they bounce back after this bye week. That's going to be the big test and big question mark for the UC Bearcats. Like I said, I feel like that bye week was
Much needed.
Unintentionally timed perfectly because of the 3-game losing streak that we saw them go on right before the bye week. Coming out of the bye week, this is going to be the gauge for the UC Bearcats for the rest of the season. The game against Iowa State, the game against Baylor. What we see from those 2 games is going to determine whether or not the UC Bearcats are going to be one of the more mid to bottom tier teams in the Big 12, or if they're going to be a bowl team, if they're going to be a bowl eligible team in their first year in the Big 12.
I will say this, Cincinnati Bearcat fans, if you're wanting to take a trip, that game at Houston, Saturday, November 11th, tickets are as low as $5. Obviously, you're going to have travel fees.
Yeah.
Maybe it makes more sense to spend $41 on the lowest ticket and just go to West Virginia across the river. But either way, those are back-to-back weeks. So Bearcat fans wanting to travel, pick your poison, I guess. Overall, it'd be cheaper to go to West Virginia. But even though game tickets are $5 in Houston, that's great. I haven't seen a ticket that low. They're not even that low at the high school level anymore. Not even the middle school level.
Yeah, you're right.
Huh. That takes us to the end of our show. We're getting into finances in our next show. Just kidding. Folks, just another reminder, the game of the week, the TKDS and NFHS football, high school football game of the week this Friday will feature 2 teams coming out of the Greater Catholic League. We will see the Baden Rams take a trip to downtown Dayton to face the Chaminade Julienne Eagles. Matt and I will have the call for that one, but we will also be live tomorrow from 4 to 6. More pro and college talk coming up on Sports Now. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you in less than 24 hours.
Every day, we find ourselves on a path full of decisions.
It's me.
Sometimes small and sometimes big. Sometimes alone and sometimes together. At McAfee, everything we do is done with your comfort, health, and convenience in mind. She always wanted the best for you, and now you can rest knowing you've provided the best for her. Breathe easy. Choose McAfee.